guys, I'm back and I'm here to do my January wrap up 2025. So I feel like I got a good start this month. I actually have one 5-star book, so that's a win-win for me. So let's get started. So the first book on my list is this one right here, which is called Penitent, and it's by an author who's called Mark Legatt. He is Scottish. This is a book that follows an unlikely character. He's called Hector Lawless. Hear that in the name, Lawless. He is a lawyer and he is known for being very thorough, and he's also known for being able to deal with hard cases. So Hector has a little issue, is he has a little OCD and a few other issues, which makes him not like the most friendly person, that you want to be around on a regular basis. But the main thing is that the work that he does really well. So this is a story that takes place in Edinburgh, Scotland. And the main character, Hector, is put onto a case that has happened in an old boys' school in Scotland. And at this school, there has been a charge of possible boys being sexually abused by an adult. Now, this case is quite the whirlwind, and that's all I'm going to tell you because you really need to experience this one. Now, I'm going to give like a little bit of a warning. When you're reading the book, so when you first start out reading this book, it's going to appear to be so damn dark and depressive that you just want to stop reading. When you get to that point, push on through. Don't stop. Push through. Because things are going to change, and that story is going to become something that you will not be ready for. Let's just put it that way. I was thoroughly surprised by this book. This is really like what you would call a mystery thriller, but in a different kind of way. Not like in a typical thriller way, but a thriller all the same. It's full of very dark descriptions of Edinburgh. And I read this from my book club here in Normandy, and we actually had the author get Skyped into our book club. And one of the first questions I asked him was about Edinburgh being a character in the book, which he thoroughly agreed with. And he said, yes, it was done on purpose. He wanted to show the duality of the city of Edinburgh, the fact that Edinburgh is a beautiful old city with lots of history and a really, interesting side of it, but it also has a very dark, scary side of it that he wanted to show as well, which he does extremely well in the book. I highly recommend this one. It's an out of the ordinary mystery thriller. I would hope that he would do a part 2 to this one, but I don't think he will. I highly recommend it. I gave this one a 4 stars. Really an interesting read to start the year 2025 with. Penitent by Mark Legatt. Okay, the next book on my list that I read was this one right here, which is called How to Kill Your Family. And this one is by, I'm looking down at my iPad, Bel-Ami. Now, this also was a book club read for my book club here in Normandy. I did not vote for this one. I'm sorry. I did not. I didn't read this one. I listened to it on audiobook, and I was thoroughly annoyed. And yeah, I was thoroughly annoyed by this one because, first of all, the main character is someone whose voice after a while becomes annoying because the book is written like this. So you have the main character who's called Grace Bernard. And Grace Bernard's has come into some information about who is her real father. So once she finds out who her real father is, she goes on this revenge rampage to get rid of her biological father and his family, mostly because she was rejected when, like before her birth, whatever, or right after her birth, she was rejected. Her mother was rejected by her father. Now, the father is supposed to be this rich, kind of upper class British gentleman, and the mother was kind of young, fancy free, not rich. They found each other, had a relationship, and separated, and the mother wound up pregnant. And when she went to inform the father, he basically said, I don't want to have anything to do with you. That was a one-night stand. I don't know you like that. I have a wife and kids, so no, I don't want this. So from there on, the mother raises her daughter on her own. Grace is raised, living with her mother. But then something happens, and then Grace comes into this information of who her father is. So what we basically have is a story where we're hearing the main character of Grace talk about the people that she's about to kill. And she also talks about societal issues. And it's kind of ranting and ranting and ranting and ranting and ranting. It's not the best. It's the kind of book that after a while kind of grates on your last nerve. There's some things that are interesting about the book, but then it also takes a couple of really strange turns that don't make sense. And that ending, though, what a horrible ending for this book. But anyway, be that as it may, I did not like this book, as you can tell. It was a big fat 2 stars for me. And I did hear, when we were discussing at the book club, I did hear that this book has been picked up by Netflix. So Netflix should be doing an adaptation of it. Now, I'm kind of thinking that the adaptation might be better than the book, particularly if Netflix is smart enough to change the ending. That's my 2 cents in there. But as a whole, I did not enjoy this book. And apparently this particular writer, Bel-Ami, has some kind of this is like some kind of a series thing she has going on with How to Kill Your Family. It was just not for me. I would love to get those 7 hours back. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, so that was not a fun one for me. The next book that I read was this one right here, which is called Bel-Ami. And this one is the first French book that I read of the year 2025 with Anna, who will be buddy reading with me 11 more books in French. And this is the story focused around the character who's called Georges Duroy. And Georges Duroy is a young man who's fairly good looking. He's from the countryside of Normandy, and he has just gotten out of the army. He's been out of the army it hasn't been that long that he's been out of the army. And when he was in the army, he was stationed in Algeria. And so he comes back, and the first thing he does is suit up and try to move. He moves to Paris. And so he's working in Paris as a clerk, where he is poorly paid and not looked upon, any more than anybody else. Except Georges, he got ideas. Georges wants to be somebody. Georges wants to be rich. He wants to be, he wants to be well clothed. He wants to be, with a beautiful woman, and, he wants to have clout and all this stuff. So what does Georges do? One day he's, finished work or whatever. He's walking through the park, and boom, he bumps into one of his friends from the army. And I ain't telling you nothing else, okay? So the story begins, and we suddenly have a story that talks about what it's like to be someone who's on the have-not side of the scale, who wants to be a have side of scale, and what that person is willing to do to get there. So, whether it be, swindle, steal, lie, cheat, whatever you got to do, you will do because it's for the greater good. I'm going to get myself, to that level that I say that I want. My goodness. Okay, this is by Guy de Maupassant. I am used to reading Guy de Maupassant's short stories, which frankly I prefer. This one I did not get along with very much because there were some things that in the storyline that just did not correlate very well for me. And not only that, in some places it drags a little bit. And the character of Georges Duroy is trash. Let's just put it that way. But the women are pretty messy as well. His colleagues are pretty messy too. Almost everybody in this book is pretty messy. There are hardly any redeeming characters in this book. But I feel like Maupassant doesn't do a very good job of telling this story, because there's a point in the story where something happens and it doesn't really make sense for a few reasons. And from there, something else happens, which also doesn't make sense. But okay, we're on that roll. But I personally didn't appreciate it. Anna didn't appreciate it. And we both declared, 2 stars for this one, and that we would just stick to Maupassant's short stories. So yeah, it was not a success. So yeah. Okay, the next book on my list was this one right here, 54 Miles by Leonard Pitts Jr. This is the follow-up to his first book, The Last Thing You Surrender. And so in this book, 54 Miles, we come back in contact with Thelma, George, and Luther, and we see where they are much later on. I'm not going to talk too much about this one because it is a sequel. But if you do get a chance to read this one, I think you really should read The Last Thing You Surrender first. But if you really don't want to or can't, you could just read 54 Miles, because Leonard Pitts Jr. does a great job of filling in some of the major areas that happen in the first book in this one, so that he could tell the story, completely. I highly recommend this one. It's so good. Gives an excellent view of the civil rights movement from the inside, which is very interesting to see. And the characters are like he makes the characters all jumping off the page. Full formed characters that you either hate to your core or love, love. Highly recommend Leonard Pitts Jr. He is the man. And he is the auto-buy author for me, and I think for a lot of the people that I discuss books with. I highly recommend this one, 54 Miles. It came out last July 2024, and it was really, really good. This is my first 5-star book of the year. All right, here, 54 Miles. Okay, the next book that I read was this one right here, which is Annie Bot by Sierra Greer. Now, this book was a real surprise for me. I wasn't expecting to like this one as much as I did, but boy, what a read. Greer did the business in this book. So this is a story of a bot who's called Annie. And she is considered a cuddle bunny. So you know what that means. So she's programmed to please the person who owns her. And she is owned by a man called Doug, who has just gotten out of a long-term relationship that wasn't working. And so he decided to invest in a bot, which he tried to make look like his girlfriend until they told him, no, you cannot make the bot look like somebody you know. We don't do that. We don't do that. So change the skin color of Annie so that she wouldn't look like the girlfriend and a few other things. So in the beginning, we start right out the gate with this idea of this bot who has a certain sense of understanding when Doug is happy and when Doug is not. And from there is what kind of becomes this roller coaster ride of us watching the relationship between Annie and Doug go up and down and then down, 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 down. What we realize is that the more that Annie tries to please Doug, the more human she starts to behave and try to please Doug, the worse things get. But I really like this because it does talk a lot about this idea of what it would be like to have a bot like this around, which there have been movies on this idea, having a robot at home that can be a mother, a wife, a girlfriend, and all the rest. But what I liked about this one is the relationship is just between Doug and Annie. And we see how it almost resembles kind of like a real relationship, except Doug has the power because he's the human and Annie is the bot. I highly recommend this one. It really does have some excellent moments of, clarity and understanding around the idea why it's not a good idea to have these kind of robots, but also around the idea of, how these robots are treated. And is this a good idea to have robots that have the capacity to, imitate feelings and things like humans do? Is this really a great idea, kind of thing? But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I highly recommend this one. It's a short read. This is the first book I've read by Sierra Greer. Yeah, I highly recommend this one. It's just really, really good. All of the aspects that are dealt with in this particular novel. Really, really good. I gave this one 4 stars. I would highly recommend this one. Last on my list is this big boy right here, which is Paul Lawrence Dunbar, The Life and Times of a Caged Bird by Jean Andrew Jarrett. Now, this book is a very mammoth biography that I started reading in November 2024. And I had to go off and on. I was buddy reading this with my friend Patrice. I'm going to put her channel here. We were reading this on and off since November, and we managed to finish it finally the 9th of February, which is actually the day that Paul Lawrence Dunbar dies. He dies on the 9th of February, but a different year. But anyway, this book was, for me, I think it's a good book, but I think it's just a bit too dry for my liking concerning nonfiction writing. It's very dry and it's very dense. Jarrett goes to the lengths of explaining quite a lot of things about Dunbar, but a lot of things about a lot of other people and a lot of other stuff. The best things about the book are that as you read through, chapter by chapter, you get these fantastic pictures. Let me see if I can get one. There's some fantastic pictures of a lot of people, different people. Like here's one of Paul Lawrence Dunbar and his wife, if I can find the picture. Here it is. Here's one right here of Paul Lawrence Dunbar and his wife. Then there's some really good ones in the beginning, because Paul Lawrence Dunbar actually went to school with Orville and Wilbur Wright. And as you can see, he's up here, right here, Paul Lawrence Dunbar. Paul Lawrence Dunbar was a fairly arrogant man and a very talented man. Another thing in here is they have some great pictures, but they also have some fantastic poems that he wrote. Now, as he was a little bit arrogant, I mean, he was a very good poet and he knew it. He would write a lot of poetry that was written in dialect. And at some point, people became so accustomed to him writing in dialect that they only wanted him to write in dialect, which he refused to do. He was the kind of person who wanted to write what he wanted to write when he wanted to write it. He did have a chance to do quite a lot of things and meet quite a lot of, different people like Frederick Douglass and W.B. Du Bois and Teddy Roosevelt, and plenty of people that he had connections with, but he had his demons. One of his main demons was alcoholism, which I feel like that was something that was kind of hereditary because his father had a lot of problems with alcoholism. And he was a wife beater. And that was the thing that was blowing my mind when I was reading the book. Like, it was more towards from the middle to the end, where we hear a lot about the details of his relationship with his wife and how he treated her was just blowing my mind. Very disappointing that, when you like a writer's work so much and then you find out that they're trash, you just don't know where to go with things. When I finished this book on the 9th, all I could think of was just how trash this guy was, and just think, why? But it's a really interesting book if you can take the time to read it. Like I said, it's so dense, you're gonna take a lot of time to read it. So it's all of this right here. And this is, like the notes and acknowledgments and stuff like that. So I recommend it if you can stand all of the information that's going to be thrown at you, because I said it's really dense, but it's very interesting. There's some interesting things. Now, I did not know that there were Black Masons. Did you know? Because I did not know. I did not know. Like, so many things like that I ran across here that I was like, yeah, I did not know. I did not know. So I recommend it, even though, like I said, I gave it a 3, but it was mostly because the writing was very dry for me. I think Patrice gave it 4 stars. She gave it 4 because she focused more on the fact that it gave a lot of really good information, stuff that she didn't know as well. I just had to give it a 3 because it was dry. It was dry. I'm sorry it was dry. I wish it was a lot less dry, because if it was, I would have probably given it a 5, because the writer was trying to do too much. I think he was adding too much extra information when he should have scaled back just slightly, just to let it breathe, the information. Because this is the kind of book where you start reading the page and you wind up marking 1, maybe 2 things, and then all of a sudden you go to the next page and it's another 2 or 3 things. Then the next page is 5 things. Then the next page is, and you're like, whoa, it's a lot. So that for me was the downside to this book. It's too much information to actually process. It would have been better if he would have taken on a different way of writing about Dunbar. And I would have preferred not to have so much back and forth, because he talks about the relationship between, I think his wife was Alice and Paul. He talks about the letters they wrote back and forth to each other. And in order to do that, he had to explain what was going on. And I didn't feel like it was totally necessary for us to be privy to this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, because it kind of got to be a little repetitive in the end and not really worth reading about. But as for the rest of the book, fantastic. Wonderful excerpts from different poems written by Dunbar in here. Great pictures. I highly recommend it, even though I did give it a 3 stars. So those are all of the books, the 6 books that I read this month. I'm kind of happy with that. I'm hoping that this month of February, things will be a little better, but work is flowing in now. So it's, we're going to see how my February goes. For the moment, it's fine. It's going fine, but I'm going to have to step it up. So that's all I have for you today. Comment below and let me know what you think about these books. Have you read any of these? Would you be interested in reading any of these? And I will be back with another video very soon. Bye.